What's on my mind these days is actually, I had just finished some research that was going to be titled The State of Mobile Advertising, and then we were incorporating or looking at our ad spending forecasts for this year and forward, and then realized that we had to open that topic up a little, broaden it, because the mobile spending was getting to a point where really mobile was becoming the state of digital advertising. So we changed the report, we changed the kind of the focus of our research to really talk about how the state of digital advertising is mobile. That this is the year when spending is going to tip much more heavily to mobile compared to desktop. So I think what's happening right now is really that everyone has started to say, well, we recognize consumers have shifted their attention to mobile devices. That's been happening steadily and for many years. Adoption of smartphones and tablets has gotten to a point where everyone knows they've got to now start investing their dollars, their ad dollars, into the mobile channel. In this research that we just finished, we identified 4 of those leading misconceptions through in-depth interviews with a lot of different players in the industry. And interestingly, they all surround the things you'd expect. Creative, targeting, measurement, and then really sort of, so I'll give you a little bit more detail. For the creative side, there were 2 misconceptions really. The first one being that a brand can't deliver an immersive experience in mobile because the ad units that they got accustomed to on the desktop space were not necessarily as compelling on a much smaller screen. Or that there was this misconception that mobile was still just all static banner ads, those little tiny ads at the bottom of the screen. But our research and our ad spending forecasts really do prove that that is a misconception, because the bulk of ad spending is still happening within the banner category. But in the banner category, we include mobile social ads like those on Facebook and Twitter, which by no means are that tiny little static banner ad on the bottom of the screen. So that is one argument, that the banner category itself is not comprised of all of those little static banners. And then there's also the growth of mobile rich media and mobile video, both of which we see comprising, I think it was around 48% of total spending within the mobile display category. So that is a significant chunk, and that's growing quickly. So we really felt like that was clear evidence that that is a misconception, that there's a lot more happening in mobile than just those little banner ads. The second misconception around creative was that what works on desktop can just be ported over and work on mobile. And that is one that's been around for a really long time. So for someone like myself that's been focusing on research in mobile for a while, it's sort of surprising that that's still kind of a misconception that's out there. And when we dug a little deeper, it really comes down to efficiency, that brands and marketers that are working in the trenches, doing what they need to do, are saying it's just so much more efficient to use these desktop creative assets on mobile too. And maybe when they're first starting out, that makes sense to just sort of test the mobile waters. But what we're hearing from agencies and brand marketers is that the danger is if you get stuck in that pattern, that if you just continue to use those desktop assets on mobile, that it really, you're inevitably leaving money on the table, because brands that have tested head-to-head creative that they've developed specifically for mobile phones or even tablets that address the context of the user, which is really unique on a mobile device, that they're seeing much better performance. So that was another thing that we tried to sort of clear up with our research that we just finished. And the last 2 are about targeting and measurement. They kind of go hand in hand. If you're not reaching the audience you want to reach, then what really are you able to measure? So on the targeting side, there's the belief that without the cookie, which everyone has gotten used to in the desktop world, that in mobile, it's how can I track the consumers that I want to reach if I don't have the comfort of having that cookie. So we've really spent a lot of time in this research explaining the other advertising IDs that are out there. And also just saying that cookies do exist on Android devices on the mobile web side specifically, and that's not a small market. I mean, I think our projections are that 52% of smartphone users in the US use Android devices. So you do have quite a large audience that you can be tracking with cookies on Android devices. But the thing is, you have to remember that's only mobile web. The big challenge for everyone is that they know consumers spend most of their time using apps. So how can they track consumer use in the app world? And that's where Google and Apple came out with their advertiser IDs, which really allowed brands to track consumer behavior in the app environment. So those 2 things are, I think, big things that brand marketers need to know. And then there's also other types of IDs that are like deterministic IDs, which are like an ID that you might create when you create your Facebook profile, then that follows you everywhere, no matter what device that you're on. So a company like Facebook or Twitter or anyone with one of those user-created logins can really track you across all devices, mobile and desktop. And then there's more mathematically derived IDs, which are now enabling brand marketers to not only identify if one consumer is using an app on their device and also the mobile web to understand, hey, that's the same person or same device. They can also then use these, what they're called probabilistic IDs, to pair consumer use of a mobile device to pair it to a desktop computer. There are a lot of ways to track consumers in the mobile space. The challenge is it's not just one ID. Like everyone who's gotten comfortable with the cookie really have gotten comfortable with the idea that I can use just one ID. So now there's multiple IDs, and that takes some getting used to. So consumer activities and behavior can be tracked in mobile devices, it's just different. And then the last part is measurement. So measurement comes down to really what do I use to measure my performance. Some of the challenge around measurement is that brands still don't really know what the right objective is for mobile advertising. So they've had really clear objectives in the desktop space because they've had a lot of time to test and learn and really understand, okay, this is something I can achieve, whether it's a conversion, meaning sales, or if it's lead gen. But in the mobile space, it's a little bit less clear because it's new and brands really need to understand, does it make sense to try to achieve the same goal that I can achieve on desktop, or something totally different? So without having a clear objective, they're struggling to really say, what metrics do I use to measure really evaluate if my spend was paying off for me. So part of it is really a learning curve of understanding what they want to achieve, and that takes some, unfortunately, testing and learning to figure out. And then the other takeaway is that it's not a best practice to rely on one metric in mobile to evaluate performance, that the best practice is to use, everyone will look at click-through rate, it's inevitable, but really to look beyond that and use multiple secondary metrics to really understand if your investment is paying off. So those were kind of big misconceptions that we tried to clear up with our research, because the dollars are flowing, but people are still a little nervous. Location is something that I find fascinating because I've seen that space evolve really quickly. And interestingly, I think everyone who might be not so familiar with mobile think of geofencing immediately. That's kind of the first thing that they think of. But location, to me, of what I've seen evolve quickly and what I find fascinating is this use of understanding audience segments through location and understanding where people are going frequently, really where they might, the pattern of where they go might suggest something about that consumer. So now I'm seeing a lot of people building audience segments through an understanding of where that people go and how they traverse the world. So I think that's really interesting because audience targeting in mobile has been something that, as I mentioned, people are worried they can't track the audience segments that they had grown accustomed to finding on desktop. How do they find them in mobile? And location is a way that people are starting to understand that, oh, this is that consumer group that I really think is valuable, and I can find it through location data. So it's exciting. As device targeting was sort of the focus for the past few years, people, and partly because they weren't sure if they were able to find their audience in the way that they would feel really confident, they looked at device type as a sort of a proxy for audience. So they might say an iOS user could be a certain, and they would look at the apps that the person is using on that device and then make sort of some assumptions about audience. So I would say now that we're getting better IDs, we're using location data to understand audiences. Now I think the focus is shifting, and I would say rightly so, to less about devices from a strategic standpoint. I mean, tactically, you're always going to have to think about device when you're deploying a campaign. But strategically, I think the shift is happening to focus more on people than devices and saying, all right, this is the audience I have, this is my budget, this is the audience I want to reach. Let's just go out and find them wherever we can.